You're listening to the Cash Flow Academy podcast with Andy Tanner, your source for investing made easy. Here's Andy Tanner.
Welcome to the Cash Flow Academy podcast. I'm your host, Andy Tanner, and this is where we do our very best to try to make investing simple. And I have a fabulous guest. I had the chance to speak with a little bit before we started recording. I told him I was a little starstruck, and that's true. I have one of my favorite authors and favorite podcasters. David McRaney is with us. So, David McRaney, thank you for coming on the program.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much for having me. I love an opportunity to reach out and talk about all the things I'm obsessed with and do that endlessly and take way too long to answer questions and take up all the time you have. So yeah, let's go for it.
Oh, that's fantastic. So David is the author of a new book called How Minds Change, The Surprising Science of Belief, Opinion, and Persuasion. And in 2012, I think it was, he had a fabulous book called You Are Not So Smart. And it's about around 50 ways that our minds might play tricks on us, I might say. And I'm going to start off, David, with, why don't we start off, let me start off and set the context with maybe a clumsy metaphor about why I enjoy your podcast and your book so much. It's funny because, I run in the circles of investing. And so when people, I'm sure you get the same, say, what are your top 5 books, or whatever. And when I say, well, one of my top 5 is You're Not So Smart by David McRaney, they say, wait a minute, I understand the Benjamin Graham books. I understand the investing books that are there, but, why would you have a book like this in the collection? I also say, I don't listen to Joe Rogan. I listen to David. My wife and I, we listen to David McRaney. So it's kind of an odd thing that people say, why are you so interested in being a fellow psychology nerd with him? So, but this is the metaphor I would use. When I was in college, I drove a beater. I drove a 1968 Dodge Dart. And it had this thing called 3 on the tree. It was a clutch manual transmission. And one day I went to shift it and it just locked. And I had to have my car towed. And the guy opened up the hood and he says, your linkage here is all screwed up. I didn't even know what linkage was. And he showed it to me and he says, hey, he just kind of forced it back into place with his hands. He said, I don't know how long it'll last you, but you're going to have to get this fixed someday because it's going to start jamming on you. And knowing that was under the hood, knowing that was there, first, when it would happen, I would go under the hook, fix it, and go about my way. And by being cognizant, by understanding there was a problem there, I got to where I could shift that gear in such a way that it wouldn't jam anymore. Anyone else that drove it would jam. But I realized, I guess the metaphor would be, is I had a problem with my car that was under the hood. It wasn't something I could see. It wasn't something I really understood when it went wrong. But by at least knowing it was there, it didn't fix my problem, but it did help me navigate better. So with that poor metaphor, I think that's a lot how our minds work, is there's the conscious mind that we can see, and we see the world as what we think is real, but there's a lot of stuff going on underneath the surface. And so I guess you're sort of an expert in what I would call cognitive blind spots. Is that fair to call you an expert? You're so gracious. You always say you're a psychology nerd, but is that close?
Yeah, I would never. I mean, I'm a person who talks to experts all day, every day, and translates things from, their layers. There are many layers, levels, and silos of expertise into language that we can all take from. I had my editor on How Minds Change said, at some point I was doing the thing that you just predicted I would do. And he's like, you are an expert on this topic now. And I was like, I don't think I'll ever be able to say that out loud, but I'll let you say that if you want. But I have a certain level of understanding about all these things. And I can point you in the direction of people who have even deeper understandings of them. Yeah, I mean, my main fascination is inside of psychology is in neuroscience, and so all the social sciences, from political science and sociology and anthropology, all the stuff, all the ologies that explore human beings, is always about trying to get a better understanding of the stumbling, fumbling strangeness of being a human being. And part of that, many of the studies that turned me on to this world were ones that showed how unaware we are and how often we're the unreliable narrator in the story of our own lives. And like, I'll tell you about 2 studies real quick that'll, for people who aren't familiar with what I do, that should like go along with the, that's what's under the hood thing you were talking about. The one that started my whole world was the person swap experiment, which is part of the change blindness research, where they had somebody, and Darren Brown repeated this in one of his mentalist specials. Someone's asking for directions on campus, and this person is actually a researcher, and they ask somebody, hey, how do I get to the commons? And then a person starts telling them, okay, you go here, you go there. And then while they're talking, 2 people walk between them with like a big door or something. And one of the people holding the door switches places with the person who was asking for directions. And they measured how often people noticed that the person they're talking to just got completely switched to a different person. And sometimes the switches were, the person would change gender, or they'd be much taller, or, there are all sorts of things they would switch. And about half the time, people didn't notice. And I'm not in a they didn't react way, but they asked them afterward, was anything strange about that conversation? They'd say, no. So that clued me into something that I wanted to explore, and I've been exploring it for a long time. It's not so much that how easily we're tricked or how often we don't notice what's going on around us in that way. It's that we have an extremely high degree of confidence that that's never happening, which I thought was super fascinating. It's this undeserved confidence in all of our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and a complete unawareness of the sources of those things. The other one, which is really relevant to your program, I think, is, and this is a big part of the new book, is there's this great study where they had people look at they have a sheet of paper that says, I want you to imagine you flip a coin, and if it comes up heads, you win $200. If it comes up tails, you lose $100. And then they tell them the result of the flip. And then after that, they say, would you like to do this again? Would you like a second run at it? Same conditions. Well, when people have it come up in their favor, they'll say, yes, I would like to flip the coin again because I'm ahead $200. And if it comes up not in their favor, they say, yes, I would like to flip again because I'm down 100. I need to win it back. So either way, they come up with some justification, right?
Yep.
But the crazy thing is, if you do not tell people the outcome of the flip, no one chooses to flip again. And even though we know that it doesn't matter what the outcome would be that you would choose, if I deny you the opportunity to create a justification for your behavior, you just won't do it. Because we only do the things that are easiest to justify, and minus any justification, we will stay in stasis. So the idea that we make decisions based off of all the evidence or the sort of choices, the idea that we thoughtfully, carefully contemplate things is at least secondary, if not way deeper than how our desire to justify and rationalize and come up with good reasons for what we think we will do. And that's the world in which we live. So that's sort of the meat of what I like to explore in all of my work.
One of the interesting things is David is very bold because he enters into, when you're going to talk about sociology and particularly, political division, you find yourself, talking about politics or religion or wedge issues. David really is unafraid of wedge issues, and it's kind of conversational nitroglycerin with the people I run with. But it's fascinating because, let's take, for example, most people probably would understand maybe what a confabulation is. Some type of, I make up some type of, mental justification to, justify some type of behavior maybe, and there's fascinating, people you speak to your podcast, people that have split brains and the way confabulation works. Mm-hmm. And isn't it interesting that, confabulation and the other 47 different things like that are under the hood, so to speak, in our brains. Everyone, as you read your books, you can see this behavior in everyone you know. And isn't it nice that you and I don't have any of these problems, right? I mean,
that's why it's called "You Are Not So Smart." I enjoy I've had people over the years say that, like, when they first saw the book, they got mad at it. I'm like, you got mad at an inanimate object, but it's like, I didn't realize that was like it was never planned as a clever marketing thing, but it turned out to be pretty a pretty good way to get people to pick up a book and at least read the first page. Like, oh, how dare you? And then they open it up and they're like, I'm going to show I am smart. And then, it turns out, oh, wait, this book is because of slightly different bin than I thought it was going to have. But yeah. It's the you and you're also smart is me also. And it's all of us. There's a unity in the humility that I hope comes out of discovering all the biases, fallacies, heuristics, and motivated reasoning that goes into being a person.
It's interesting. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and it's a tough subject to broach because people really defend. We all do. We defend our rightness, I suppose to say. I'm right about this, and I said, "What do you think the chances are that you and I are right about everything?" He says, "Well, there's no chance we're right about everything." I says, "Well, do you think maybe there's 5 things that we're wrong about, or 10, or whatever it is?" And I says, "Let's say there's 5." And he says, "Yeah, there's probably 5." I go, "Okay, let's find out what those are." Mm-hmm. Let's list them. Yeah. Let's list them on a paper. Any comments on that idea?
Oh, that's one of my favorites, like mantras, thought experiments. The great Will Storr, who is an author who explores similar material to mine, and we've become really good friends over the years. And he blurbed the book. I sent him my new manuscript early on. He gave me lots of notes. He's great. He has this thought experiment that I've been asking everyone to do lately, and this is especially if you are like a manager or a CEO or something. Here's how the thought experiment goes. It's very, very easy. It's exactly what you just said. Ask yourself, and it could be very specific. It could be about one thing, but ask yourself, am I right about everything? And if you answer yes, then you should become a politician. But if you answered no, ask yourself, okay, well, then what am I wrong about? And the weird thing about being wrong about things is the second you know you're wrong about it, you stop being wrong about it in some way. So ask yourself, am I right about everything? If the answer is no, ask yourself, what am I wrong about? And then if you answer, I don't know, ask yourself, how come you don't know, and what can you do to change that? I feel like that's it's almost something you should do while you're drinking your morning coffee every day. It's certainly something that we don't do without prompting, and something we don't do. It's not a very intuitive way to go about the world. It's something that takes effort. Sometimes we have to build institutions like scientific institutions to encourage us to do things more like that. To seek disconfirmation of your assumptions is difficult, and for many people, it feels like there's a spectrum, I think, of people who are more or less hesitant to do so, and it certainly changes depending on the topic. But it's essential to like if we got into a time machine and went back 1,000 years, 500 years, 200 years, one of the things I think we would feel very strongly as we walked around was, wow, these people are wrong about a lot of stuff. And there's no reason to assume that a time traveler from 100, 500, 1,000 years from now wouldn't come back to our time and go, wow, these people are wrong about a lot of stuff. So it's important to me that we keep that mindset going forward and get away from the undeserved confidence that gets us into very, 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 very dangerous territory.
So there's 3 things I hope we can attack and weave into our discussion. The first one would be, and we'll probably just have an amalgamation of all of them. We'll just do all at the same time. First is we love the idea of being able to persuade other people. And so How Minds Change, your latest book, I've loved it. I love your style. I love how you write. And I always get the physical book and the audiobook. I was so glad. My wife, when we got the audiobook, she says, did he record it? Did he have it done? I says, yeah, because she loves your voice. She absolutely loves your voice. She says, yeah, he recorded it. So we'll talk about changing other people's minds. We'll talk a little bit about changing our own minds. And then we'll talk a little bit about how that relates to people who want to be entrepreneurs or investors, and why having or striving for a more accurate picture can be beneficial. So when it comes to changing other people's minds, I was a really bad basketball player in college. I was probably the worst person ever at that university that played. And I was tall. I couldn't jump. I couldn't shoot. I could foul people, and I was tall. So they said, well, we'll give him some scholarship money here. And so I never found my way in college. From accounting all the way down to zoology. I looked at that catalog. Nothing interested me. So I wound up in sales. It was pretty personable. And so I spent tremendous amount of time studying how to persuade other people to buy stuff. And that's an interesting, there's a lot of shysters in that industry. And I found that, people, I started off selling with logic. I would try to convince people with features and benefits and, this is value for the money. And what you've learned very, very early in that persuasion influence, it's really emotions. Aristotle wrote a great book called Rhetoric that talks about the role of emotions and logic and stuff like that. And what was interesting is as I got into that, I thought I saw all these things that happen below the surface. There's a great book by Robert Cialdini called Influence, and he says, "My gosh, they're playing German music in the store, so you buy German wine, and then they play French music, and then you buy French wine. Just all the stuff below the surface." And I came to the realization. I thought, much like you mentioned Darren Brown, big fan. That you come to a realization, it's like, I'm no different than anybody else. And I don't want to have, these things under the hood bother me. And it was a major shift. And it was right around this time, I found your podcast. And it was like the perfect timing for me because I went on a journey to say, what am I wrong about? And there's a I don't know if it's a humility or if it's you talk about it in how minds change early on, where a person shifts their goal. This is a huge shift if we could, I think you got to make it and keep trying to make it all the time. A huge shift from saying, well, I'm right, to I'm just loyal to the truth wherever it takes me. It takes a lot of courage to do that. It's taken me to some pretty scary places. Can you talk about the shift? Because what's the saying? The second hardest thing in the world is to change someone's mind, right? But the toughest one is change your own mind. You changed your mind in writing this book.
Absolutely.
So can you talk about that power, or if it's power, what is that shift like when a person decides, I'm not right about everything? Maybe. If you're a Republican, maybe you say, maybe everything I say isn't right. Or if you're a Democrat, maybe everything isn't right. Maybe we confabulate. Maybe we shift towards motivated reasoning a lot. How does that shift come about?
Well, I'll get into some psychological terms to explain this, but I want to start with a metaphor or a nice little example from everyday life that I think people can really, this will really be like a key to open up all of this. One of the things that's most important to understand, and we alluded to this earlier, is motivated reasoning or motivated cognition is one of the most essential things to understand about yourself and other people. And it's easy to get lost in the weeds of like, well, what does that mean? But everyone's experienced this in a couple of different ways. One way is just like, if you want a piece of chocolate cake, you'll find some reason that it's okay to eat it. Like you'll say, like, I'm going to the gym today, or doesn't matter if you actually go, or I really haven't had much to eat today. I can have this. There's all sorts of ways to find you're going to eat the cake. You're just going to have to find some reasonable justification so you can do that. It's also like, when a person is falling in love with someone, they often will find every little thing about them. These are the reasons why, like the way they talk, the way they walk, the way they cut their food, the dumb jokes they say, the weird TV they like to watch. These are all reasons why you love that person. And then if you are falling out of love with that person, if you're breaking up with them, we'll say, well, the reasons that's happening are because of the way they talk and the way they walk and the way they cut their food and the dumb jokes they say and their terrible TV they watch. The facts of the matter remain neutral and they remain the same, but they become reasons for or against depending on your motivation. And that is an indication that we are driven by these drives and motivations and attitudes and emotional qualities and sense of self and identity. And we'll go looking for evidence out in the world we'll cherry pick that evidence that's available to us and pluck out the things that seem to justify whatever it is we're feeling and thinking, whatever our anxieties are, our prejudices are, whatever motivations we have, even if they're base like money, or they're really complex, like you care about the people around you and things. Why would we do such a thing is a good question. I'm one of those people when people say, why do people like sunsets? Like, I want to actually know, why do people like sunsets? Like, I'm not just satisfied with because they're nice. Like, that's very circular to me. I want to know Well, there's got to be a reason why we like that. The reason we do this justification thing, and a lot of this comes from the work of Hugo Mercier and Dan Sperber, is something called the interactionist model, where reasoning is, in the psychological sense, is coming up with reasons for what you think, feel, and believe. And you're coming up with those reasons because you're always under the assumption you may have to defend yourself to your trusted peers. And you want to seem like a trustworthy individual to those people. And so you want to, the things you do and you think and you feel in your plans of action, you want them to seem like they were reasonable to those other people, even if you're never going to have to defend it in front of anyone. This is a really important, this is an important factor in how our minds do and do not change. So let's put that over to the side, and I'll get into the what you asked, which is what's going on there. I like to talk about John Piaget's work into something called genetic epistemology, which is if you've ever gone to a bar and they gave you a really nice tall drink and you thought, wow, they gave me a lot of alcohol for a little bit of money, then you probably haven't read your Piaget. His research was he had kids with the little tall, with a short, flat glasses. They filled them up and then they pour them into a tall glass, and the child usually is like, wow, you magically gave me more to drink.
Yeah.
He was doing all that research to try to understand how do minds form over time? How do they build layers and layers of understanding and become more and more complex? What is the nature of the assembly of knowledge in the brain? And in that work, he has these two terms that he uses a lot. One's called assimilation, and the other is accommodation. Assimilation is disambiguating novel, uncertain information, making sense of things that you haven't seen before by fitting them into your existing models. So you can sort of interpret new information as confirmation of what you've already think, feel, and believe. Whereas accommodation is acknowledging that there's just too many anomalies here, or this is too outside of what I understand to make sense of it. So the model must be incomplete or incorrect. I'm going to try to update it by accommodating, creating a new level of understanding. We've all seen this with children, when a child sees a dog for the first time and you tell them that's a dog, something happens in their mind like, okay, it's furry, it walks on four legs, it's non-human, it's alive, that's a dog. Then later on, when they see like a horse, they may say something like, look, dog. Or if they're a pretty advanced child, they might say like, big dog. That's assimilation. This seems to fit what they understand about the world. It walks on four legs, it's non-human, it's furry, it's alive. This seems to be what you told me was a dog. And when a adult says, no, that's not a dog, that's a horse, they have to do something really miraculous, which is internally build another level of categorical understanding, a new category in which the dog and the horse can fit, which will be something, even if they don't use the words yet, like animal or creature. And to do that, you have to build another level of understanding in your mind, a new capacity for making sense of the world, and that's accommodation. We're always doing this at all times. Even in this conversation, we're doing it over and over again. Some things get assimilated, some things require some accommodation, and those are the engines of how people change their minds. And over time, you do this a whole lot, you'll enter into situations where you have very complex understandings of the world, and it's just safer to assimilate most of the time. And your model got you to where you're at. It's kept you alive this long. We tend to resist changing our minds at a base level in favor of assimilation. And you can think of it kind of like walking a tightrope, where if you update when you shouldn't, you might become wrong. And if you don't update when you should, you might stay wrong. So It's dangerous in both directions, but we tend to err on the side of resisting updating because it got us here so far. But that level of resistance, which we all feel in any moment if somebody tells you, hey, it's okay to drink bleach in the morning to keep your colon clean, like we're going to resist that a little bit, thankfully so. But that level of resistance gets bounced up higher and higher and higher thanks to what I was talking about earlier, this need to justify yourself to others. And the things that bounce it up the highest, as I'll stop here and we can keep exploring it deeper, the things that lead to the most resistance. All these different motivations in our lives are going to bounce that resistance up. But as sociologist Brooke Harrington told me, the equals MC square of social science is the fear of social death is greater than the fear of physical death. So
yeah.
if the ship is going down, we'll put our reputations in the lifeboat. Is what it comes down to. We'll go down with the ship. And when knowing that our social identity, our reputation, our status, these are things that are going to motivate us more than anything else.
Yep.
A lot of things that seem complex and strange and mysterious about people start to make sense, especially their resistance to change on certain topics.
There's a chapter in your new book, How Minds Change. It's called The Truth is Tribal. And there's a fabulous, I want to advertise a specific episode on your podcast called Tribal Psychology. And and you explore, I believe it was Tajfel, social identity theory. And it's just the story. It's such a great podcast because it's just the primal nature of what separates us is huge. And, you mentioned it's often if you have an epiphany, well, a great one might be heliocentric, geocentric. We said, well, here's this holy book and the earth goes around, or the earth is the middle of the universe. And there's a dozen or so verses that say, the sun comes up here and goes down there. And then all of a sudden, poor Galileo finds out that he's not in sync with the tribe. He thinks, or Copernicus, I think, might have done some similar stuff. But Galileo, your risk of disagreeing with people and updating or accommodating, it can be like you said, social death can be as scary as physical death. And the research is so clear that like I talked about in the book, you put people in an MRI and you tell them like, hey, did you know the Great Wall of China is actually not the only thing you can see from space, and actually it's not actually that easy to see it from space. Like people in their brain that you see the blood flow, it's not that big of a deal. However, if you mention something like gun control or abortion or immigration or any wedge issue, and you do the exact same thing, it's a piece of information, and I'm updating you on like what the actual truth of the matter is. You see the blood flow shift in the brain. And as those neuroscientists who studied this told me, it looks pretty much exactly the same as what happens when a person is being attacked by a bear. And It's crazy.
You would think information is just information, but it's not. Like, we are keenly aware when updating is going to lead to the possibility of social costs, and if there's a possibility or there's a threat to our self-identity. And for many issues, though we would like to assume that we are neutral and that we have carefully contemplated, we've gone down to the bowels of our castle and read all the scrolls by candlelight and held up our finger and said, this is what I think about this issue. Very often those issues are deeply tied to your identity. They identify you as a certain kind of person to other people. And we feel at some unarticulated, non-salient level beneath consciousness itself, we feel the strong emotional urge to, be careful on that one. And that's what leads to a lot of our most intractable disputes.
It's interesting. There's a saying that says we are our own worst enemy. And it seems often that that's the case. With investing, let's talk a little bit about something that just drove me crazy. Meme stocks. Okay. So there's I don't know if you're familiar with this or not, but there's a company called there's a company called GameStop. And
I remember this, yeah.
Okay, so it's funny, in one of my courses, I was years and years and years ago, I was talking about what's called a fundamental analysis. And the word fundamental really applies there. When I'm going to pick a company to own, it would make sense. Let's look at their financial statement. Let's look at their income and their expenses. Let's look at what assets and liabilities they have. And, Warren Buffett has something called a moat. Is it like Coca-Cola? It'd be tough to replicate that type of brand, right? It's just a solid global Coca-Cola. Chances are is probably going to be around for our kids to drink that sugary syrup that you can dissolve a nail in. So it's there. It's pretty strong. And I was using, there was a company called Blockbuster Video, and I was talking about something called obsolescence risk that we worry about. Pharmaceutical companies have this. Technological companies have it. Netscape, what's that anymore, right? Word Perfect, Quattro Pro, what are these words? US Robotics, what are these things anymore? Palm Pilot, CDs even, obsolescence risk. So Blockbuster failed to innovate, and Netflix did. Netflix, perhaps maybe to use our discussion, accommodated and updated in what they did. And so GameStop does the same thing Blockbuster does. Basically, it's the old, you walk in a retail space and you say, hey, I want a DVD or a CD. And as streaming came online, it put their business in jeopardy. So as a result, there were a lot of hedge funds that said, we're going to short this stock. It just doesn't look like it's a company that is going to survive. And I was talking about this. I actually pulled up their financials and showed, this. I mean, if you and I took everyone's financial statement that was listening today, it wouldn't be very hard to rank them from number 1 down to number 40, 50,000 in terms of their health, right? Like a doctor might not know when I'm going to die, but if you and I both went in, they'd say, well, Andy, your cholesterol is really high. David's is pretty good. No wonder you named your kids Ben and Jerry almost, right? It's just, it's just reality of health of a company. So all of these people that love GameStop, someone on Reddit, said, hey, let's start buying it and put all these hedge funds in a bind. Now that's an interesting motivation to buy. Warren Buffett would say, look, I don't trade stocks. I own companies. I own Apple and we provide these services. I own Dairy Queen and we sell blizzards to people. And here you have these people that are going to buy a stock, not to enrich themselves necessarily. Some, I'm sure, bought into that. But next thing you know, this company that was trading for a couple of bucks is at, $300, $400, $500 because people are buying it to stick it to the hedge funds under that narrative. Now, people hopped on Robinhood who had never educated themselves. They never made a trade in their life. And their first one is this GameStop stock. It just, the detachment from the stock price, from its fundamental soundness, it still exists today. It's still over $100 a day, and it's just slowly leaking down. I love your coin flip idea, but the idea that people react emotionally and to be able to find a sense of your emotions and to have a greater level of awareness of what's happening inside, I think it's just essential for making all decisions, but particularly those in the market. So any insight on how a company goes from $1 to $500 in a week because the mob on Reddit says, hey, let's stick it to these hedge funds, not knowing that they actually made a lot of hedge funds even richer by doing it.
Sure. I mean, I look at, when it comes to marketplaces and the stock market, like, to me, I don't see anything weird about this at all. Like, it's every bit of this is illusory. All of it is a game. All this is abstract. All this is an agreement with other human beings. This is what we are thinking about this thing. Yeah. I don't have a physical object in front of me called the stock market. The Coca-Cola is an idea. It's an agreement between a bunch of people that we're going to say, this is a company. Like, it's not the Coca-Cola is not a mountain that we can go visit and climb. It's a complete abstraction. It is an illusion. So is GameStop. And if the agreement that we have with each other about how we're going to think about those things changes, then the stocks change and their value. Every bit of this is emotional. None of it's rational. Like, the numbers are things we can write down and we can make equations and buy and sell and trade using apps and all sorts of spreadsheets and things. It doesn't change the fact that we're still discussing something that's as imaginary as the Avengers. It's like, when I buy a Coke, there is a physical object that I'm drinking, but as they say in marketing, like, I'm also drinking the idea of Coke. Yep. And that's what Coke is actually selling to me. That's why they're like, hey, guess what? We're going to try to co-opt Santa Claus. Now you'll never be able to think about Christmas without thinking about Coke again. Like, and if Warren Buffett's okay with Coca-Cola co-opting Santa Claus and saying, let's buy the world a Coke, and co-opting the hippie movement, and generally speaking, doing most of their marketing efforts in the direction of, I got to keep the idea alive that this is some sort of essence of wholesomeness, then I would feel like he should be okay with the idea of people saying, GameStop matters to me in a way that my subculture values something about this. I have some sort of personal identity connected to this brand. I don't want it to die. I want to play with the stock market in a way that pumps up the concept of this, for this service, this product, this company, this brick and mortar store. No different than co-opting, Santa Claus. That's what I'm up to over here.
Yeah.
So for me, there's a democratization of abstraction in what was going on with the pumping up the stocks of GameStop or anything that we play around with, which I've been enjoying watching crypto and NFTs really disrupt this place.
Yeah.
I love seeing old school people in the world of finance getting mad about it, and it's like one of the first things you do if you take a psychedelic or just a giant bong rip in your dorm room is go, hey, money is just paper. It's one of your first psychedelic insights that, this is actually just an agreement between all of us that we're going to say this thing is a thing. And if we stop holding to that agreement, it stops being the thing and goes back to being what it was before, which was just, a symbolic abstraction. So anyway, that's pretty much where my mind goes when I think about these things. And I enjoy watching us play in those spaces at times and sort of reveal to each other that it's been a game the entire time.
It'd be kind of fun to sit on Mars and just try to get as big a perspective as we could. And Buffett tells a story I think is pretty funny. He said he was addressing some guys at Harvard. He says, well, if you're on Mars, this is what you watch human beings do. We spend a whole bunch of money to get picks and shovels, and we start to dig, and we dig and spend all this money to go way underground, and we find this shiny yellow rock that is really shiny and pretty, and we spend a bunch of money to bring it up, and we melt it down, we put it in a nice bar, and then we put it and spend some more money and put it in a truck, and we go over to another place. Then we get more picks and shovels in Kentucky, and we dig this huge hole called Fort Knox, and we dig down back into the ground, and we put this gold back into the ground, and now we pay people to guard it. And so if you're on Mars watching this, you're like, okay, we dig a hole, we pull it out, we go dig another hole and put it in, and now we're guarding it. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah. I love that too, because that does kind of like in a way illustrate why is gold valuable. Like they're in the part of there's a lot of cultural momentum to it, but in more ancient cultures, if you walked into a room where there was a bunch of gold and there were a bunch of things made out of gold, and there was a person wearing gold, like you also knew in that era how difficult it was to get this stuff. Yeah. So it was a nice shorthand for anyone who entered a space like that to go, someone has the power to influence people to the point that they can get them to excavate and craft this thing that has no other value except to demonstrate how much power they have to do those things. So it does carry that shorthand, which is why even today, a gold necklace or a gold ring or any object that is made of, fashioned of, or looks like gold still carries with it some of that. Oh yes, that takes a lot of effort to do, a lot of frivolous effort to do that, and it means that a person must be very powerful to be able to exert frivolous effort. So there is some shorthand in there. And then the fact that it's silly doesn't take away from the fact that it does communicate something.
It's, when it comes to investing, you open the book, How to Change Minds, with conspiracy. 9/11 happened, 9/11 didn't happen. You have this huge division. These people say it must be conspiracy. And a lot of people say, well, absolutely, everything's conspiracy, and you do have them. I mean, Bernie Madoff conspired, and he made up a bunch of lies because you're motivated by money, and we all know that money and power are huge motivators. To say money and power doesn't motivate people, we're probably delusional to believe it wouldn't. But on the other end of that stream, anything that bad happens, it must have been motivated by someone that wanted more money and power. And it's so funny because when people, I'm more of an investor than a trader, but when people decide to trade, what they'll do is they'll buy a stock at a certain price, hoping, it goes up, and they'll put in a stop loss in case it goes down. And it's just ironic how many times that stock will drop right to the point of their stop loss, and, it'll get them out, and then boom, it takes off without them. And immediately they think the market maker saw my order and he just took the stock right down to get me out, and now it's right back up. The conspiracy already. And I want to say, dude, you had 10 shares. They don't care about you at all, man. It's just a coincidence, right? But one of the things I hope people subscribe to your podcast, and I hope they read your books, because I'll tell you what. When I got into investing, I did it for, really for the reasons most do. They want freedom. They want to be able to have means to do some of the things they want. Most people I meet don't want to be like Warren Buffett or Bezos, or, they don't want to be nutty. They just want to be able to have enough for their means, and they're really searching for security and a little bit of freedom. And that's what most people get into investing. So you say, well, I need to learn it. I need to learn it. I need to learn fundamental analysis. I need to learn risk management. I need to learn how to evaluate a business if I'm going to buy it. But the reality of it is what they don't realize is they're really going to enter into what I would call a journey in personal development. There's a great book on investing called The Intelligent Investor by Ben Graham. It was written probably in the 30s. It's very old. It's a fabulous book, but what's interesting is it's not about gathering intel. It's about managing emotions. That whole book, if you really read it, is about not freaking out on a day like today where the Dow drops a certain amount and people just lose their minds, right? It's about keeping your head. And I will tell you, having listened to all of the episodes of You're Not So Smart, and having not just read, but even do some encore reading in David's books, you'll find that understanding how your machinery works, and just coming to the reality that our machinery is not perfect. It's flawed machinery, and we're trying to navigate this world of investing and family and getting along and wedge issues. Boy, I think it helps us navigate it so much more powerfully. What's your favorite episode of your podcast? What is the episode?
Oh yeah, I can actually answer that. I have many favorites, but the one that was for me personally, the one that I felt like, oh wow, I'm very proud of all the stuff I did over COVID. I did an episode about anti-masking, an episode about what social scientists were saying we ought to do to prevent the pandemic from being very, very bad, which everything that they said in that episode turned out to be true, and also we didn't do it. So I was like, wow, this whole episode predicted the whole thing that we were going to do. The travel psychology episode is very close to, but the one I love most is about something called pluralistic ignorance. Mm-hmm. And you may have heard me try my very best to not mispronounce that. It's one of those words. I don't know if it's my southern accent or what, but pluralistic ignorance is hard to say. I love that episode so much. It's something that I was very happy to get some of the big heavy hitters in psychology to come on that episode and help me understand it and explain it. But most of all, I had read a research paper about the Jim Jones incident and how someone inside that, the whole paper was exploring, is the Emperor's New Clothes thing actually true? And they pointed out that someone during the Jim Jones massacre did actually stand up and say, hey, the Emperor has no clothes on. They said, Jim Jones is just a dude. We don't have to do this. What are y'all thinking? Like, he's trying to get us to all kill ourselves. I'm against it personally. Let's not do that. And the crowd shouted her down, and she ended up being forced to drink the poison like everybody else.
Unbelievable.
So the pluralistic ignorance is a robust concept in psychology, which just means it's been well replicated, and we're pretty sure it definitely is a thing. But we've all experienced it. It's when almost everybody in a collective, in a group, has an internal feeling about something, but they exhibit an external behavior that suggests that they don't hold that internal feeling. So what it comes down to is everybody feels one way but acts another, and it makes everybody think that they're the only person who feels that on the inside. And one example I'd talk about is, like, if you've ever been in a college classroom and the professor says, who are there any questions? And then you definitely have a question. You definitely don't understand what's going on. But you look around and nobody raises their hand, and you don't want to be the only person that raises your hand. But it turns out everybody in the class is thinking, I definitely have a question, but let me look around and wait, nobody's raising their hand. So you end up with everybody has a question, but nobody will raise their hand. And the professor then thinks, well, nobody has a question, let's move on, and everybody proceeds in ignorance. It's a very common thing that we all do, and I love this, how pervasive it is. There are, one of the studies that do it, they had, like, it was a vegetarian collective, the commune that, but it turned out that everybody was sneaking, like 70% of the people were sneaking off to go eat fish pretty regularly. And so it turns out they were a pescatarian collective, but nobody knew that. And all these people thought that they were some sort of dangerous individual in a group of people who were mostly like-minded in this one way, but they were not. And you can keep extrapolating from that out and seeing it in so many human domains where norms will persist within an institution, within a profession, within a culture that nobody likes, that nobody wants to follow. And then they go generation to generation because of this bizarre internal versus external signal that goes on. Well, the main bit of research that really put this on in the literature was over drinking in college, like binge drinking in college, and very consistently, college students are like, I do not like doing this, but everybody does it. So binge drinking becomes a real problem on college campuses simply because of pluralistic ignorance. Like, if everyone had the ability to say out loud what they were feeling on the inside, everyone would realize, oh wait, we all actually don't like this. Let's stop doing it. And the Emperor's New Clothes thing is helpful in certain situations, but you have to be very mindful of the power of the social costs, the tribal psychology stuff we were talking about. There's a line you can cross in which busting pluralistic ignorance becomes really, really difficult because the costs of going against the norm become really extreme, and everybody's aware of that. And you can end up with these bizarre moments like like a mass suicide in Guyana. So,
and people
that episode.
Well, I'm sorry.
Let me say one last thing about that. And the reason I love that episode is because it was really hard to do. The FBI has tapes of the Jim Jones recorded all of his stuff, and
it's chilling.
And so I listened to it over and over again and to find the parts that I wanted to share, and I just got so overwhelmed by how incredible and how awful it was, and it took something that could be very pop psychology. That's interesting. I'll tell people about it at a party. To really, this feels like something that should be in the instruction manual for being a person. And so I always like episodes that end up like that.
People will say, well, Jim Jones, that's extreme, and those people are all nutty and blah, blah, blah. Another one is the flat earth. You had a chance to interview there. And it was funny. I'm looking, someone said, hey, you got to see Behind the Curve. And I said, I'm not going to waste 1 second of my life listening to people that think the earth's flat. I'm just not. And it kept going. And so finally my wife, Mara, said, all right, let's see what all the hubbub is about. And it's not about the flat earth. What it is, the reason that documentary is so brilliant is it causes really what I'm striving for rhetorically on this podcast is self-reflection. You say, well, yeah, these flat earth people are nutty. These Jim Jones people are nutty. But what's my flat earth? What cold am I in? You have, there's so many good chapters in here. Street epistemology, post-truth, social media. You talk about the cost of speaking your mind today, and whether you're right or whether you're wrong, or whether sometimes it's just an opinion. There might not just a preference someone has, maybe not even right or wrong. Man alive, you can get canceled. I mean, you delve into the stuff you dare talk about takes a lot of courage, I'll tell you, because it's tough for people. It's tough. So, David McRaney, your website is www.davidmccraney.com. This new book is How Minds Change, The Surprising Science of Belief, Opinion, and Persuasion. It's a great read. I also recommend his first book, You're Not So Smart. There's about 50 different ways that our machinery under the hood can pull tricks on us. if a person wants to improve, no one would really fight that idea. Well, I want to be better tomorrow than I am today. What that means is change in context, change in mindset, change in attitude, change in how we update based on reality. And so I just recommend David's work. Final thoughts on maybe individual change or social change and then individual change. Let's end on that. Helping us come together to find truth socially, but also what the personal battle is to find truth individually.
Yeah, I mean, in the book, I talk a lot about the dress and we the image that we saw that some people saw it as black and blue, some people saw it as white and gold, and I explain in the book the neuroscience behind why that is. It turns out it just depends on how much sunlight you've been exposed to in your entire life, and because brains take the overexposure of when something's overexposed, we try to figure out what's the nature of the overexposure, and the brain reduces it on your behalf before you perceive it. Some people who saw it as overexposed in sunlight, they took out the blue spectrum. People who saw it overexposed in incandescent light, they reduced it in the yellow spectrum. And I like talking about that because, just like the flat Earth, it's a very neutral subject, and it's an easy way to get into the science of you perceive the result of all these processes, and the process is hidden from you. And the brain often will lie to you in an effort to give you what ought to be the truth, what should be the truth, and it seems like that should be the way to see the thing, think about the thing. Scientists who study the dress, they gave me this great model called SURFPAD, which is this nice scientific cheeky acronym for substantial uncertainty in the presence of ramified or forked prior assumptions leads to substantial disagreement, which means when we are uncertain, we tend to create the most likely reality we can imagine from what we're witnessing. We interpret things as we've interpreted those things before. And if you were to draw a line, that above the line, two people, all their experiences, all their nature and nurture, all their prejudices, all the things they've thought and learned, and everything that comes before the moment that you're in a state of ambiguity or uncertainty leads to, in many situations, interpreting it completely differently than another person will interpret it. And that sort of disagreement, I argue in the book, is fantastic. I'm very glad we do that. The problem is whenever we take that disagreement and meet each other in a framework of debate, where I have to win and you have to lose. One of us has to be right, the other has to be wrong. If we did that with the dress, what good would there be in me trying to convince you that there's only one way to see it? Like, the way I see it is the way to see it. You're wrong and I'm right. The debate frame in that situation denies both parties the opportunity to do what I advocate for, which is, instead of facing off and throwing facts at each other and all the other things we do, if you get shoulder to shoulder instead and say, hey, I would like to partner up with you, and together let's try to solve the mystery of why do you think we disagree about this?
It's beautiful.
If you do that with the dress, that's the only way you'll get to these much more, these deeper truths about what's actually going on. But this is also true about a lot of the things that we debate and disagree on in all domains. Most of the time, you have to have cognitive empathy for the other person, that they cannot help but disagree with you, thanks to the way their brain is interpreting what's happening, thanks to the motivations they bring to the table, to the experiences they've had, to the identity and social costs that they're dealing with. They're as trapped as you are in your interpretation, and their interpretation of your interpretation. But you don't have to stay trapped in it. Like, what we can offer each other is the opportunity to not just Venn diagram each other, but to say, you know what if we're both wrong and both right simultaneously? And there's something deeper here that the only way to get to it is if we don't try to defeat each other in some sort of intellectual battle. Instead, we try to take what makes us amazing as human beings and leverage the strength and the ability to change our minds and update our assumptions, entertain each other's point of view, to combine our perspectives to get that third perspective that we could never get to without that kind of interaction. And so that's what I'm really advocating for in the book, and I hope that's the major takeaway people get from it.
That I think your key point, if I could just echo it, is that empathy for the other person. It's huge. You know, there's a poignant scene in the musical Fiddler on the Roof where Tevye, the milkman, is got his cart, and his daughter, who has decided to marry a Gentile, he's being shunned by, he's shunning her. And she says, Papa, please, why can't you accept us? And Tevye goes into thought out of himself, and he says, well, on the one hand, how can I, be disloyal to my God? And on the other hand, how can I not love my daughter? And on the other hand, and on one hand, then finally he just says, there is no other hand. And he walks away from his daughter. And what I think is interesting is if you open up Tevye's heart, there's not hate for his daughter. He doesn't hate her because she disagrees with his religious convictions. He's just bound by his own paradigm. He's bound by his own context. He's not a hateful person. What you really find in his heart is pain because the love he has for his daughter. It's a horrible situation to have to deal with. And so empathizing with people who disagree is a great step to having dialogue rather than, oh, this person is evil and awful, and since they have a different view than I do, I just love what you do. The website is www.davidmccraney.com. His new book is How Minds Change, The Surprising Science of Belief, Opinion, and Persuasion. His original book is You're Not So Smart. And also he has a book 1 year later called You Are Now Less Dumb, which talks about the mob mentality. But David, you've been a big influence in my life and how I thought. I imagine if you and I sat down and we could find things we agree about, we could find many things we disagree about. But what a pleasant thing to have someone who says, you know what? Let's talk about things and be open to change and improvement. So with that, I thank you all for listening. Hope you enjoyed this discussion on cognitive blind spots, the parts of our mind that, trick us into doing stuff that might seem like they're in our best interest, but might not be. The more we study that, doesn't really fix them, but by being aware of them, I think it helps us navigate our lives more effectively. With that, we'll see you next time. This is Andy Tanner, your host. This is where we try to make investing as simple as possible. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to the Cash Flow Academy podcast with Andy Tanner. For more information on investing made easy, go to thecashflowacademy.com.